This is TWiT. I want to cover what is, I think, maybe a very undercovered story that's now being called the worst hack in our nation's history. China has been taking advantage of the fact that our infrastructure is, our phone infrastructure is antiquated. Plus, thanks to our law enforcement officials who decided about almost 20 years ago now that, wow, we're going digital. We better have a way to tap digital phones. They put a back door in the phones, in the telecom infrastructure so that they could tap it. Unfortunately, when you put a back door in something, I think we now learned that that is hard to keep that a secret. And now the Chinese are in. I don't know how we get out or get them out. Salt Typhoon is what the Western intelligence agencies are calling the hackers. First reported in October. I don't think we really talked about it for quite a while. Mark Warner talked with the Post and the Times this week to say it is the worst telecom hack in our nation's history. He's the chairman of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. And I didn't realize this, but Warner's background, he was a telecom executive in the 80s and 90s. My hair is on fire, he told the Washington Post. Not a problem if you're using Signal, but it is a problem if you're just sending regular texts, end-to-end encryption over text between Apple devices and Android devices, for instance, until recently, until RCS. Actually, no, is still not encrypted because Apple doesn't support encryption with RCS. So those texts are interceptable. The hackers breached the system, he said, not for the election, but months earlier, in many cases, as long as a year ago. So they've been sitting in there and listening. Now, the Post says fewer than 150 people have been identified as having their text messages or phone calls monitored. But let me tell you, it's the right 150. They're all in the D.C. area. And they're very much involved in our national politics and our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement agencies. This is, I feel like maybe, is it too complicated? Or maybe law enforcement is a little bit embarrassed that they asked for this backdoor in telecommunications and now it's been hacked.
You know, I think the lack of response is a little bit like climate change, in that it's a little hard to pin down how this impacts any individual person. Like if I go to my friends here in town and I'm like, hey, you know, biggest telecom hack in American history, they're going to blink at me twice and go like, okay, cool. But if we fix the bridge traffic,
now we do. Yeah.
Right. So I think this is just too far removed from the average person to have the kind of like coverage layer that I think you think it deserves. But I do think that we should stop giving foreign hacking operations such awesome names. Salt Typhoon. Absolutely brilliant. Why don't we call them, like, you know, the idiot circus?
Right. They should call it fancy offshore backup. That's what they should call it.
Offshore backup.
So all of this, Ron Wyden pointed this out last month, and I mentioned it, but we didn't really, you know, maybe Alex, you're right, that it's just hard to kind of dig into this story. So back in 1994, then FBI Director Louis Freeh asked for backdoors and wiretaps to digital telecommunications. He says, we can't get in. And CALEA was passed, the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. That's now 20 years ago. Of course, this is really an important, maybe this is the biggest takeaway from this. Backdoors inevitably get hacked. You can't backdoor encryption safely, period. And we're seeing
law enforcement is always going to like push for access no matter what, even if it does compromise security. I think we're talking about the iPhone's rebooting story later, but it's one of those things where if they see a change or they see that it could like influence their dominance in the space, they are going to fight back because that's their bread and butter. That's how they survive, by just sopping up as much information as possible.
Yeah.
And that's their role. I mean, that's why you should have a balance of power in most things. The law enforcement wants to get access to more information to do their job more effectively. And you need to have other people who are like, well, wait a second. How can this
I'm not going to blame you, but you are in the country that arrested Pavel Durov because he wasn't giving French law enforcement backdoor to Telegraph.
No, that's not what he wasn't giving. He wasn't giving the information that was being requested.
Yeah.
It's not like they were asking, we should be able to have access to all of the communication of Telegram. They wanted information, most likely metadata, that he had access to, and he has no infrastructure to comply with regulation like this.
You're pretty sure that they weren't saying break end-to-end encryption. Well, actually, they didn't have to with Telegram because their end-to-end encryption is terrible.
But we just learned last week, actually, that there has been a series of arrests, something like 20 people, that were participating in a child exploitation ring.
Wow, there you go.
Just a week ago, and it would be surprising if those two weren't related, since Durov and his team ended up cooperating. It wasn't like, I don't think, like, the principle of it, I can understand that people will be a little bit cautious about what this means. But I don't think what the authorities were asking for was unreasonable. And it certainly wasn't, full backdoor, even though, of course, European authorities, just like they do in the US and everywhere, will push for that. Although now with Seoul Typhoon, I think it gives fuel to the people who say, see, maybe not. And just to be clear, it's only text messages that are intercepted, right? Like iMessage is safe, WhatsApp and end-to-end encrypted messaging.
That's right.
Is
and presumably
not,
phone calls.
Subject to those, right? Right.
Presumably phone calls, although who makes phone calls anyway?
Well, I mean, the 150 people who were targeted are probably in an age bracket where they do spend time on the phone. So it's not like, it's trivial. Certainly it's a big deal. But it's not everything on your phone. It's surprising, though, that I didn't even know about that law, and the fact that there was someone at a computer with a password going like, okay, I log into the system and I can see everything in all of the telecommunication infrastructure in America. That's crazy. It's a bit
free
insane.
At the time promised there'll be no backdoor. We will protect this. It'll be safe. Don't worry about it. And maybe it took 20 years, so maybe it was sort of right. I don't know.
Leo, can I quibble about something that we're saying here with the 150 people thing? Because I just pulled up a tweet from Josh Rogan. He's a Post contributor, and he said that Senator Rounds said that China's Salt Typhoon hack gave the Chinese Communist Party the ability to read your text and listen to your conversations. So to me, that puts this a little bit more on the phone.
Yeah, they're in the phone network.
Yeah,
I mean, that
if it's not end-to-end encrypted, they got it.
Yeah.
And our phone systems, because of Kalia, are wide open, because there's a back door.
I'm assuming even the encrypted messages, if they're text messages, they could easily see where the source and the destination.
Yeah, you see the metadata.
Right.
So they even know if who's having
texting who's calling who.
Yeah. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is talking to Joanne, I don't know who he's talking to. He's talking to somebody. Then who they're talking to. You may not.
But then that also talks to foreign endpoints, right? So if it goes off the network into another network,
that's
they would if they had access to those networks as well. There's multiple layers in which that data can be.
So essentially, the Chinese Communist Party now has better intelligence on Tulsi Gabbard than we do here in the United States.
That's the example I should have given. If Tulsi Gabbard is calling Vladimir Putin, or Donald Trump is talking to Vladimir Putin, or, Elon Musk is talking to Vladimir Putin. Presumably, now the Chinese know that, and that's valuable. Right. Certainly, that's something.
And they can see who that person calls next, right?
Yeah.
And maybe match those things up.
Wow. You get that. You get the idea. You see why it's a problem. According to the executive director of U.S. Cyber Command, who... Not Barron Trump. That's next year. Morgan Adamski said that the Chinese-linked cyber operations are aimed at gaining an advantage in case of a major conflict with the U.S. They've compromised, and by the way, this is not just Salt Typhoon. They've compromised our grid. They've compromised a lot of our infrastructure and IT networks so that they can, according to Adamski, carry out disruptive attacks in the event of a conflict. They're just sitting there. They have access to heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in server rooms. They have access to the grid, the power grid, to water controls. This is all from U.S. officials saying they have this access.
So what do they do now? I mean, what does the American infrastructure do? Do they just change the password and use like a password manager? Like what happens next? Do they repeal the law? Do they remove the back door? I'm sure a lot of law enforcement agencies rely on it to
Well,
function.
According to the New York Times, they're concerned.
I'm sure they're evaluating and deciding what to do.
They're concerned. Right? The problem is, of course, you need to know where they are and how deeply ingrained they are. And yeah, I'm sure they're trying to do something about it.
The thing about telecoms that they have infrastructure that they don't want to replace. Security is expensive, and that's hardware and software and the expertise of staff and in the maintenance. They try to do these capital expenditures, build out these networks, and then just ride them until they explode, patch them. And the modern security needs modern equipment. And to be able to replace all of that equipment and make sure it's up to date is not something that they've been incentivized to do. They want to try to take as much money off the top as they can.
Thank goodness we're banning TikTok. That's all I can say. It's about... That's what we're doing. We're banning TikTok. That'll fix it.
But Wesley, do you think they don't have the ability to fix it? Like they're just leaving it as is and the Chinese have access to it and that's it?
I think if you can see what are the negative consequences that is imposed on them as of now, you can see that there is no incentives to fix it. They're not losing their license. There's no threatening of anything. It's just like business as usual. And so there's no incentive to change it.
Am I insane that it's weird that we're doing business with China as a nation, like with trade and rules and ships and planes, while they perniciously undermine our national security day to day?
Well, what's the alternative, Alex? What would you do instead?
Well, I mean, we could collapse their economy overnight by stopping imports.
Well, you collapse yours at the same time.
Bring it on, baby.
I think we might find out. I think that's on the table.
I'm not trying to say that I, Alex Wilhelm, have the solution here. I'm just saying it's very strange that we're sitting here going, China's going to attack Taiwan by 2027. They're in our systems. They're going to shut off.
I think you go the other way. Personally, I think your best bet is to strengthen ties and to get more economically intertwined so that there's less incentive for China to be a bull in the China shop, right? Make it so that it's more dangerous for them.
This is the way it's worked since the end of World War II, right? Mm-hmm. Intertwine economically all the economies you can so that no one has an incentive to send bombs on one another. And we've seen time and time again that when the economies are not working together, then that's when the real issues start happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think Russia,
sometimes it doesn't work. But.
Russia feels free to operate because they are kind of already a pariah, right? They've been a pariah, so they have less to risk. And sanctions haven't slowed them down much because I guess
it's starting to have.
Yeah,
it's starting to.
I don't know. Yeah,
and they have a segregated
internet on this, but.
I mean, the other side of the coin here, the people that we're talking about being bad actors have essentially had to, break themselves off from the global internet and become technology islands. I just find it very strange that this is not, just because there's not bullets, Leo, we don't tend to treat this stuff the same way.
Hey, thank you for watching this little snippet from our big show, the News Roundtable, This Week in Tech. I'm Leo Laporte. Each week we cover the week's tech news, in-depth analysis, but it's also fun and engaging. You'll find it at TWiT.tv along with all of our shows. And if you want more, just hit the subscribe button and we'll be sure to bring you a lot more great content. Thanks for listening.